So, Lanzarote, about 1900 miles from Newcastle, heading more or less south, somewhere between 4 and 4.5 hours flying on one of these, and about 80 miles from the coast of Africa. We stayed at the THB Royal Hotel at Playa Blanca, a resort near the southernmost tip of Lanzarote. Comfortable with, for the most part, good food. Has a handy little supermercado on site, and a larger hyperdino is down the street on the way to the coast. First stop on day 2 is El Golfo, a small village on the west coast. We went there to locate the starting point for a guided walk we took later in the week. Lots of restaurants along the seafront and a profusion of cacti. Quite windy. Too windy for my camera's microphone, even with a dead kitten fitted. Nearby is the Charco de los Clicos, also known as the Charco Verde, or Green Puddle according to Google Translate, which I entirely failed to get a good photo of. El Golfo's other claim to fame is that it appears in Pedro Almodovar's film Broken Embraces, which stars Penelope Cruz. Next up was a visit to Yaiza, a small town about 5 miles inland from El Golfo. This too was to be a starting point for a guided walk. Since it was early December, there was a nativity scene, or Belen as it is known locally, in the town square, but it was much more than that. It included scenes from all around Lanzarote, including Arrecife, where the airport is, Playa Blanca, where our hotel is, El Diablo restaurant, where they cook chickens over the heat of a volcano. There's supposed to be the figure of a defecating boy somewhere in the scene. It is considered good luck if you spot him. This is the nativity scene in a cave rather than a stable. This shows fig trees being grown in enclosures made from volcanic rock, and in the background is Cesar Manrique's El Diablo restaurant. You can see it better from this side. When we were there were also a number of oversized Christmas decorations. On the edge of the square, Plaza de los Remedios, which means Remedies Square, is a small church. This is named Nuestra Senora de los Remedios, Our Lady of Remedies. Not sure of the story regarding these remedies. If I had read my guidebook beforehand, I would have known to look out for the painted wooden ceiling, but I missed it altogether. Never mind, here's a few photos of the interior. Next, we headed off to Salinas de Janubio, or Janubio Salt Flats, a little way south of El Golfo on the coast. Extracting salt from the sea was once a major industry in Lanzarote, but these are the only salt pans still in use. The salt is used to preserve fish, but can also be used in the production of dyes. We went down to the edge of the salt pans, where there is a little cafe, but the best views are from higher up, overlooking the lagoon. And now over to Bill, who will tell us what we did next.
Well, it is now 1:37 on the Monday, the 5th of December 2022, and we're at the Salinas. Have you taken pictures of the Salinas?
I have.
Well, that's good.
Yeah.
Well, we're not going to do them because they're guided tours, and we've decided to go elsewhere and do something called the rock pools of Janubio. And
Is
let
that
me just...
Janubio or Janubio?
Ah, well, I'm speaking English, not Spanish. So we're going to park just down the road from here, and this book here says we start the walk even at the water desalination plant. We go down to the lava rocks near the shore and head left. Now this walk we're going to possibly do is 6 kilometers long, and it's going to take 2 hours. The idea is at the end of the walk, before you walk back, should I say, you get to a thing called the El Convento, which has a cloistered entrance opening back into the face of the cliff, and it is a lava pool, right? Partly helped by the sea coming in and out. Apparently it's an enormous cave, but it can be quite vertiginous getting down to it. So if you get that far, we'll have to decide whether we're going to do it, because it says don't do it in wet weather. And we had an atrocious night last night, but fortunately we were all in bed.
Well, we found the desalination plant and headed for the coast, following it south. Lots of dark volcanic rock with little vegetation, indicating that this is an area that was changed forever by the eruption of Timanfaya volcano in 1730. It continued to spew out lava and clouds of black ash for another 6 years, eventually covering a third of the island. There were further, less dramatic eruptions in 1824. There are, however, signs of plant life, although it must be tough growing on volcanic rock and being drenched in salty water. We weren't quite sure where the El Convento cave that Bill was talking about was. We were looking out for it, and the map does show Punta Abbas o del Convento, which means Abbas Point, or the convent, so I guess that was it. This video might be it. There is a definite shelf in the rock which might lead to a cave, but there was no way we were going to go down there. At this point, Clive and I decided, rather optimistically, to carry on, walking south down the coast and then east along the southern coastline to get back to the hotel at Playa Blanca. The remaining members of the party headed back to the car. A building on the horizon gradually got nearer. It turns out that this is the remains of the Hotel Atlante del Sol, also known as the Hotel de los Charcones, Hotel of the Puddles according to Google Translate, apparently. Built in the early 1970s and then abandoned, there seems to be a number of stories. One suggests that the plan was to build a golfing resort, but, having built the hotel, they realised building a golf course on volcanic rock was nigh on impossible. Another story is that one of 2 partners involved in the scheme ran off with most of the money, and yet another is that the hotel was built without planning permission and the developers couldn't afford the fine. I did also hear that Cesar Manrique, the famous Lanzarotean architect, was involved with a campaign to halt its development. Although you struggle to see it from ground level, from a Google Maps overhead view there are signs of further development south of the hotel. There are a number of circular markings, at least 100 metres in diameter. No idea what they were. On this day we went on the first of our 2 guided walks in the Timanfaya National Park. These are completely free, but you need to book ahead. Absolute bargain. We headed back to Yaiza to meet up with our guide, Fanya, who drove a small group of us into the national park in a surprisingly tough minibus. Believe me, it needs to be. So off we went, following the Termisana route, as they call it. Lots more black volcanic rock, but in places you can see islands of older, redder rock, which contains iron. You can also see circular enclosures constructed to protect crops such as vines and figs from the wind. This is Montana Rajada, a volcano whose cone has collapsed in an interesting way. A shiny blue colour indicates cobalt in the rock. When you look around a bit, there are actually quite a number of plants. I wouldn't like to say what they all are, but I think this is the one they dropped down a fairly shallow hole near the Restaurante El Diablo, upon which it goes up in flames due to the volcanic heat. And this one is definitely a fig tree. In places, it is very obvious that this rock was once molten lava. It looks like golden syrup in a cold room. In other places, it forms tubes. You can even crawl inside one and get your photo taken. And if you're really determined, you could even get an 8-inch rip in the back of your trousers. Anyway, time for lunch. We headed off to a house once owned by Omar Sharif, which was designed by none other than Cesar Manrique, in the hope of getting some food in their restaurant, or it might have been at the Lagomar Museum just down the road, and only a cafe with snacks was available. So we searched out a restaurant called Tele Club Nazareth, just by a roundabout on the LZ10. They do a very good rabbit. Lunch done, we headed back to what I am going to call the Lagomar Museum. Supposedly, Omar Sharif was visiting the island whilst filming The Mysterious Island, fell in love with the house, and bought it. He then held a housewarming party, and during a game of cards, lost the house to his estate agent, who just happened to be a champion bridge player. He left Lanzarote and never returned. It's a good story, but I have my doubts. Omar Sharif always denied the story. In any case, if true, Omar Sharif only owned the property for a few days. It's all a bit confused. Although Cesar Manrique clearly had an influence on the design, it was an English developer, Sam Benedy, who started construction with the help of Jesus Soto, a Lanzarotean architect who often worked alongside Cesar Manrique. It is said that the estate agent who won the house in the card game was, in fact, Sam Benedy. After all that, we made our way back to the hotel, pausing only to take a few snaps of a moonlit scene and a sunset in the other direction. To be honest, I can't really remember where we were when I took these. Off to the Cueva de los Verdes on this day, which is up at the northern end of the island, near the east coast. Here we are, waiting to go in. We got there fairly early, but it was still busy. Cueva de los Verdes literally means cave of the greens, but it has nothing to do with underground cabbage. The name comes from the Verde family, who used to keep goats in the cave.
I tell you that this volcanic field was from the eruption of Lagomar volcano. When the volcano erupted, the lava flew down into a canyon. This canyon, full of lava, the highest level was solidified in the contact with the earth, and then the lava continued flowing inside. This lava, during all the eruption, didn't have the same level all the time. So it was solidified just in the laterals and created these marks of the levels of lava. These marks, in some points, they are together. When two marks get together, we have different levels, different galleries. Just up there, you have the upper gallery. Then we go out in that way. And in this part of the way, you can see the last lava flow.
Back in the days when pirates terrorized the island, these caves were also used as a refuge by the islanders. This area is now often used as a concert hall due to its excellent acoustics. Well, that was fun. Next, we were off to the Mirador del Rio, another of Cesar Manrique's constructions at the far north of the island, overlooking the island of Graciosa. This sculpture, in case you're wondering, is Manrique's representation of a bird and a fish, representing air and water. If you're looking for a river, Rio in Spanish, there isn't one. It's the name given to the narrow stretch of water between the two islands. The Mirador used to be a military base. Work started in the 1970s and involved excavation, building the Mirador, which means viewpoint, and covering with volcanic stone. It took 2 years, which seems pretty quick, and Manrique was assisted by Eduardo Cáceres and Jesus Soto, who you may remember from the Lagomar Museum. But no time to hang around. Now we were off to another cave, and this one has crabs in it. It goes by the name of Jameos del Agua. A jameo is a cavity left behind when the roof of a volcanic tunnel collapses, apparently. Presumably this is at the point when you get in, I don't know. Manrique has been here as well, creating a bar restaurant. Narrow paths lead to an underground saltwater lake populated by small, white, blind, shell-less crabs who survive thanks to a total absence of predators. But there's more! After eventually extracting ourselves from a single-track road clogged with traffic, we made it to the Jardin de Cactus, meaning cactus garden. Well, what do you know, it's the same in French. This is yet another Manrique design, housed within the crater of a volcano, and it's stuffed to the brim with roughly 450 species of cactus. It's in Guatiza, an area roughly halfway between Arrecife and the northern tip of the island, near the east coast. They still farm cactuses here, or rather the beetles that eat them, which are used to make cochineal. So, having seen enough cactuses, we went back to the hotel. This day saw us returning to El Golfo to do another free guided walk. This time our guide was Petra, and we were to meet up in the car park at El Golfo. Slight tangent, here's a picture of our hire car, which had plenty of room for 5. Petra drove us back inland a bit before heading through the volcanic rock back to a coastal location a little north of El Golfo. She pointed out some of the nearby plants. This is sea grape. You might know it better as Zygophyllum fontanacea, a succulent which grows in the lava and clearly has no problem with salt spray, which makes it a halophile. It is also a xerophile, meaning it is tolerant of dry conditions. Petra also drew our attention to tiny green stones in amongst the black sand. This is olivine, which is also known as peridot. It is a magnesium iron silicate, and there is a lot of it about around El Golfo, although we didn't find any chunks as big as this. We headed back along the Land Rover track and then turned right, following a path heading south parallel to the coast. It had been a tad overcast, but it got gradually brighter and warmer, and soon we could see the waves crashing against the rock. The importance of lichen was explained to us. It is the first step in breaking down the rock into soil so that other plants can get started. Apparently the yellow lichen normally appears where a bird has defecated, so I guess the birds are important as well. Some plants have already made a start. It may not look much. After all, the last eruption was in 1824, but these are trying conditions and the plants grow very slowly. After all that, we headed off to the Cesar Manrique Foundation at Tahiche, about 5 kilometers north of Arrecife. This was Cesar's home. It's a great building, and maybe I missed something, but there didn't seem to be an awful lot of art around when we were there, either Manrique's or anybody else's. There were an awful lot of Manrique's selfies and a number of his possessions, including his Nikon SLR camera, but not a great deal about his work or what he was attempting to do with it. Another gripe I have is that there don't seem to be any good books on his work in English. I did find one book that was printed in English, German and Spanish, but the reviews gave the impression that it was largely a picture book and didn't go into much depth. Odd, really, for such an influential figure. I guess I'll have to learn Spanish. On the way back to the hotel, we stopped off just outside Teguise, a little further north along the LZ10. Here we found the Castillo de Santa Barbara, which also houses the Museo de la Pirateria, the Pirate Museum, but the museum was closed. The castle lies on the rim of an extinct volcano and requires a short walk uphill. It was built in the 16th century and provided a refuge from Turkish, French, and English pirates. Teguise was the first colonial capital and continued as such until 1852. It was chosen to be as far away from the coast as possible in the hope of avoiding pirate attacks, but this strategy didn't always work. Before going back down to the car, we circumnavigated the cone of the volcano whilst dodging airliners on their way to Arrecife. Unfortunately, the handprint reader which gives access to Blofeld's secret lair appeared to be out of order. Today Clive and I decided to do what every other tourist on the island does and visit the Montañas del Fuego, Mountains of Fire, inside the Parque Nacional de Timanfaya, north of Yaiza towards the west of the island. But first I got up early. On the way to the coast I passed this on the side of a truck. Well, I thought it was funny. Then I went for a visit to the Playa Blanca Marina. I brought a tripod along, so I thought I had better use it. after breakfast, it's off to the Mountains of Fire. There's a gate a couple of kilometres away from the El Diablo restaurant where you have to pay your 12 euros. Jim and Jane had already done it and didn't fancy it again, and Bill would have done it again if the multi-destination ticket thingy was valid, but it wasn't. So Clive and I paid our 12 euros and walked in, with a steady stream of cars passing us as we went. When we got to the car park, things got really busy. We stood in the queue with the other happy campers and were eventually herded aboard a coach, only to find that there were no seats left, so we disembarked and got the next one. I might have enjoyed it more if I hadn't been fiddling around with my camera the whole time, but it is a bit of a scrum and it is difficult to get a good look at anything over the heads of your fellow passengers. So if you're ready, let's go! December, and Clive and I have just been driven around some volcanoes in a coach with a lot of other tourists. Jim and Jane dropped us off at the entrance to the park where you have to pay 12 euros to come in and visit, and we hiked the about 2 and a bit kilometres to the restaurant, which you can see behind me. That's the restaurant. This is where they cook chicken in a volcano, essentially. They have a little sort of grill thing which they stick chicken over and then they cook it from the heat of the volcano. Also just behind me there's a little hole in the ground where they throw in bits of dried plantage and it catches fire. I can see Clive behind me at this point as well. Yeah, not bad. It's a lot more expensive than the other guided walks we went on, which were completely free. You just have to book ahead, and the guide was very informative. But yeah, it was worth doing this. We're going to head back to the gate now, and hopefully we'll be picked up by Jim and Jane so we can go on to whatever comes next. So, having been driven around the volcanoes to the sound of a heavy metal track, we were then forced to drink a cup of coffee and eat a double chocolate muffin in Manrique's glass-fronted restaurant. We also observed the chickens cooking over a volcano, and every so often there was a big pop as some water exploded out of a hole. They do this, they pour the water into the hole and the volcano heats it up and it goes whoosh and makes a great big noise. They're obviously very keen on proving that they are sitting on top of a volcano. So that was about it. But before we could go and get picked up by Jim and Jane at the gate, you are forced to buy a t-shirt, which is what I'm wearing here. So I got that. I also got some soap made of aloe vera, which grows locally, and then we headed back to the gate. By now, of course, rather than a steady stream, you had cars queuing bumper to bumper almost all the way back to the gate. We timed it almost perfectly. Jim and Jane popped up just as we got to the gate. We headed northeast, passing through Mancha Blanca and Tajaste, and eventually stopped at a place called Casa Ignacio Restaurante. They had lemon-flavoured beer, a different brand, and after a little persuasion served me a beef stew. Nice. No time to rest though. We were off to another volcano, Caldera de los Cuevos, which means Raven's Cauldron. It can be found south of Mancha Blanca, which means white stain, just to the west of the LZ56. One website I found suggested that the volcano appears in the Marvel movie Eternals, but I think this is porkies. Everything else suggests they filmed in Fuerteventura. And now, over to Jim.
So this hill over here, that's Montaña Colorado, that Billy, with a bit of help, and Jane and I walked round this morning, 4K route around the base.
A bit of help.
And this one here, this is Montaña Negra, which is an older volcano, so there's more vegetation on that one, especially on the north side. And where we're walking now, this is Caldera de las Cuevas. So we're walking round and we shall see the collapsed caldera, I hope. Again round the base, I think. Or maybe over go up a bit. Not sure.
And this is in
We
the
shall see.
newer part of
This
the
is in the
lava.
natural park, as it's called, rather than the national park.
Yeah.
That's right. And what you see around you is the lava from the flows in the 1700s.
Correct.
1730 to 1736. I could be a guide, couldn't I?
Yeah.
I take tips.
But in earlier eruptions, it was so
Oh, he's
violent.
hugging the camera now. Look
so
out.
violent that part of this,
Sorry, are you an equity member?
yeah, so I get paid so much by the day. Part of it collapsed in on itself, which is what, when we were on La Palma,
Yes.
they were worried about happening. And a few years later,
Oh, the slippage.
it's happened.
Yes. Yes. Indeed.
So we walked around the other side of the volcano and through a gap, and suddenly we were inside the crater. arrived was standing next to what is known as a lava bomb. This was a large chunk of lava that presumably got thrown more or less straight up, came back down again and hit the ground so hard that it split. And that's what you see now. Before heading back to the hotel, we dropped in at nearby Bodega Stratfus. A bodega is a wine shop or cellar. In New York, it can also mean a small grocery shop in a Spanish-speaking district, and in the Philippines, it means a storeroom. Glad we cleared that up. Bodega Stratfus very much fits the first meaning, and also includes a restaurant and gourmet shop. Google them, they have a website. However, they can't make decent hot chocolate, and their stock of local beer is very limited. What they do have is another extensive Belen nativity scene outside. After that, we headed roughly southwest until we reached the village of Femes, which is right on the edge of a sudden drop from the mountains down to the plain known as El Rubicon in the far southwest. This was to be the starting point of a walk the following day. Then back to the hotel for some drinks before dinner. On this day, Jim, Clive and myself were going to get a taxi to Femes and walk back through the mountains and then along the coast to the hotel. Meanwhile, Bill and Jane were going to walk from the lighthouse at Punta Pechiguera at the far southwest tip to the hotel. The first part of our walk involves walking slightly uphill to a goat farm and then heading more or less south. We followed the path around this cliff and descended to another goat farm. At this point the path heads more southeast. You can see it fairly clearly here. At this point the track turns right and heads southwest along the coast. It becomes rather less dramatic since you are always at least a few hundred meters away from the coast, and the path twists and turns to follow the contours of the barrancos, ravines. Still, there are a few sights to liven things up. And then, slightly sooner than I expected, we were back at the hotel. Meanwhile, it seems that Bill and Jane had seen the lighthouse, walked along the beach for a bit, and then found something to climb, but they were long since back at the hotel. And that's about it. Coach transfer back to the airport for Bill and me, and a flight back to lovely Newcastle. Fantastic.